Do guns cause crime? If there are more guns, does that lead to more violent crime like homicides? And if there are less guns or more gun control, does that mean less crime? Wouldn't it be great if within about 10 to 12 minutes or so, an ex-prosecutor took some time to unpack the studies and statistics to bring you the truth? Let's get into it. If guns are the driving force of the problem, they're the driving force of intentional violence, then we should see a statistical relationship between the amount of firearms in a given population and the amount of those problems flowing from them. After all, if guns are the problem, then more guns equals more problems, right? And likewise, the solution would be some sort of combination of more gun control and less guns equals less problems, right? Well, unfortunately, this is just not borne out by any of the statistics that we're going to be taking a look at here. Let's start off in the United States. I'm going to be putting the finer details, if you want to see them, into the description box below, simply to save time. But I'm going to start off with some things that probably people will accept. According to various studies that I looked at, surprise, surprise, there's a higher ownership rate of firearms in rural versus city areas. Suburbs are somewhere in between. Also, perhaps unsurprisingly, Republicans are more likely to own guns than compared to Democrats, with once more independents being in between. There are a lot more Republicans that live in rural areas than in cities, and there's a lot more Democrats that live in city areas than in rural. If you basically comb through all these different studies, it tells you something that we all intuitively know. There are more guns per person in the country than there are in the city. In fact, there's about 60% of homes in rural areas have a firearm in it as compared to less than 30% in the city. And again, suburbs are somewhere in between. So one way of looking at this problem is that if we looked at the amount of violence per person, places with more guns should be less safe. In other words, rural America should be far more dangerous. It should be far more violent with a lot more homicides as compared to urban America, if guns were the major driving factor in the driver's seat. But of course, we all know that that's absurd, and that's just anecdotally not the case. And the FBI statistics back this up as well. According to a 2017 FBI study, you were basically about 250% to 400% more likely to be murdered in cities as compared to the country or suburbs. And again, almost by coincidence, the homicide numbers basically map to instances of rapes, robberies, assaults, and burglaries. And guys, I'm going to save you a lot of time from staring at the charts and tables and just tell it to you like this. Bad things happen where bad things happen. And small bad things like petty crime often correlate to where bigger bad things happen, like robberies, burglaries, rapes, and so forth. And those bigger bad things, those happen where the worst bad things happen, like homicides. I know, big surprise. Crime tends to beget crime. And let me be clear, this is not some sort of pro-rural, anti-urban, whatever. This is not to make any kind of political or demographic statement. This is 0% about politics and 100% about just observing what the studies and statistics are saying. Homicides correlate with crime, and crime correlates with other socioeconomic factors, it appears. And no, I'm not claiming to have discovered this. This uncomfortable truth is found in what criminologists refer to as the law of crime concentration. The super short version of that is about 1.5% of streets in the United States account for about 26% of the crime, including firearm homicides. What do these streets have in common? High poverty and low education levels. Gun control will not solve that. And by the way, solve it, they have tried. In major metropolitan areas such as Washington, D.C., massive gun control was instituted back in 1976. And did we see a corresponding drop as far as homicide rates go? Absolutely not. We actually saw it surge across the 80s and 90s. And when the U.S. Supreme Court in 2008 in their landmark decision D.C. versus Heller struck down these gun control measures, which virtually outlawed possession of handguns, concealed carry, you name it, the anti-gun crowd said that this would cause a cascade of crime and violence to return to 1990s levels, where, incidentally, by the way, the gun grabbers had all of their laws in place, including a federal assault weapons ban. But hey, if you want me to do something about that, let me know in the comment field below. But of course, that's not what happened. We saw those violence levels continued to drop as time went along. If gun control had worked, if it had been a major positive contributing force to helping homicide issues, we should see the exact opposite happen, where in the years where gun control was in place, the numbers went down, and then before and after it was in place, it should be up, right? And by the way, Washington, D.C. is not some sort of cherry-picked example. We see virtually the exact same thing if we just change 1976 to 1982 when gun control was passed in Chicago, and if we change 2008 to the U.S. Supreme Court intervening in 2010. And once more, it did not turn into some sort of immediate ensuing bloodbath. We saw Chicago more or less rise and fall, as with everything else, with other national crime rates. But wait, Tom, I can hear the anti-Second Amendment folks among viewers saying, we all know that the problem with the cities, who have common sense, strict gun control measures on the books, is that they are flooded with guns from those rural, suburban areas, or sometimes nearby pro-gun states. So that's the problem we have to be solving, right? Okay, two things. One, this argument is 100% quietly admitting that guns are not the problem and gun control is not the solution. Otherwise, then why are the places where those guns are coming from, the headwaters of where those firearms are coming from, why do those places not have even more problems if they're responsible for flooding the cities, right? Two, again, this is not borne out by the statistics. In England and Wales, they passed massive gun control across two different laws in 1968 and 1997. Now, this is an island nation. There's no nearby city or state to basically pass the buck and blame to just because it's a couple miles down the road and there's an active gun shop there. Did we see homicide levels fall between 1968 and 1997? No, we saw them go up. So when England then doubled down in their gun control in 1997, did we at least see the numbers then go down after that? No. We actually saw homicide rates per million people actually rise from 1968 to 1997 before eventually skyrocketing once both laws were actually in place, and took the 1968 homicide level and spiked it by 250% in the early 2000s. If guns were the problem and gun control were the solution, then why was England safer with more guns and more deadly with less? And this is further borne out in other international numbers. I'm not just cherry picking. Guys, you've made it this far in the video. Please show your support for the Second Amendment as well as this channel. Tell the algorithm other people need to watch it. Hit that like button. Subscribe to make sure you don't miss any future videos. If you like to see this kind of high volume, high intensity research projects, please consider becoming a supporting member for extra cool features. And guys, back to the show. If guns were the problem, then countries with a higher level civilian firearm ownership rate should be more dangerous than those with less. Right? Wrong. Many of the nations with the highest levels of gun ownership rates by civilians, like Switzerland, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Canada, Iceland, Slovenia, Serbia, Czech Republic, and of course the good old US of A, have among statistically the lowest rates of homicide per gun. In fact, if we looked at the countries that have among the highest homicide rates per capita in the world, El Salvador, Eswatini, Jamaica, Honduras, Brazil, just to round out the top 6. Something that is remarkable about them is how few guns there are. Every country that I just named has a lower rate of gun ownership than all the ones that I mentioned first, and it's often by a ratio of 5, 8, 10, or even 15 to 1 more guns in the safer places. These 6 countries average 147 times higher homicide rate per gun than the United States. If the United States had the same homicides per firearm rate than these 6 countries average, we would have over 3 million firearm homicides per year. To show you how insane that number is, guns would kill more people than every leading cause of death on the CDC website, ranging from heart disease and cancer down to chronic liver disease and nephritis combined. Guns in 1 year would kill more people than every American soldier who gave their life in every war and conflict in America's history from 1775 to present, including both sides of the American Civil War. Gun homicides would need to nearly double the current death rates in the United States for these numbers to be valid, rather than accounting for approximately less than 0.3%. As they currently do. And by the way, so-called assault weapons, while we're on the topic, like AR-15s and AK-47s, which are not assault weapons, but we're just going to use that word right now. Politicians love to talk about those. There are tens of millions of those things floating around the United States, and they combine for, well, a number that is so insanely small, you're going to have to see my separate video linked in the comment field below to get an idea as to how those statistics stack up. What we can safely say when we look at those partial lists of some of the safest and most deadly places, the safest places that are flooded with guns have a lower poverty rate and a higher education level compared to the countries with insane homicide numbers. Again, this is not a gun problem. Violence, whether committed by a gun or something else, is a poverty and education level, not a gun problem. And the answers need to be addressed accordingly. Before I leave you, here's your quote of the day as a reward for sticking around. Poverty is the mother of crime. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.